Hello, night listener, and welcome to Little Nightmare. I'm Emma, and tonight I'll be keeping you company to help you fall asleep. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Story 1. The first thing I became aware of was the cold, a damp and granular chill that pressed against my cheek. It was the feeling of rough-hewn wood, painted with a thin skin of frost, and beneath that, something else, a faint, resonant hum that traveled up through the bones of my face and into the dark vault of my skull. I was lying on a porch. My fingers, curled into loose fists, were numb. I unclenched them, feeling the splintery texture of the wood grain, and pushed myself up. A wave of dizziness washed over me, thick and syrupy, carrying with it not memories, but their opposite, a profound and absolute emptiness. I did not know my name. I did not know where I was. I only knew the cold planks beneath me and the deep, purple twilight above. The air smelled of wood smoke and decay, of sugar and spice carried on a cold wind. All around me, houses lined a quiet street, each one adorned for the season. Pumpkins squatted on every porch step, their carved faces leering or laughing or screaming into the growing dark. Candles flickered within them, making the shadows dance and writhe like living things. The trees were skeletons, their bare branches clawing at a sky the color of a fresh bruise. Leaves, in shades of crimson and burnt orange, lay thick upon the lawns and sidewalks, and they rustled with a dry, whispering sound as a breeze moved through the street. It was a scene of perfect, picturesque Americana, a postcard for autumn, but to me, in my hollow state, it felt like a stage set waiting for some terrible performance to begin. A sharp, throbbing pain pulsed at my temple. I reached up, and my fingers came away sticky with a dark, coagulating substance. It wasn't the bright red of blood from a cut. It was darker, almost black, and it had a peculiar, metallic sweetness to its scent. I stared at it, this evidence of a violence I could not recall, and felt nothing but a distant curiosity. A voice cut through the silence, startling in its normality. "Hey, you okay?" A young man was standing at the foot of the porch steps, his hands shoved into the pockets of a worn jacket. He had a kind, open face, etched with concern. In his eyes, I saw my own reflection. A pale girl with dark, tangled hair and wide, frightened eyes, sitting on a stranger-esque porch in the gathering gloom of a Halloween evening. "I don't know," I said, and my voice was a stranger-esque, a raspy, unused thing. "I don't know where I am. You ray on Oak Street," he said, his tone gentle, as if speaking to a spooked animal. "This is the Miller place, but they ray away for the week. Can you tell me your name?" I tried. I reached into the void where my name should have been and found only echoing darkness. A tremor of real fear, cold and sharp, finally pierced the numbness. "I can remember." He came up the steps slowly, his boots making soft thuds on the wood. "I am jarred. Let me help you up. You ray bleeding." His hand was warm. The the moment his skin touched mine, a jolt went through me, a sensation so powerful it was almost painful. It wasn't just warmth, it was life. A vibrant, pulsing current that sang to the emptiness inside me. A deep, primal hunger stirred, so sudden and intense that I recoiled, snatching my hand back. He looked startled, but not offended. "It's okay. You ray in shock. Come on, my house is just a few doors down. We can get you cleaned up." I let him lead me down the steps and onto the sidewalk. The world tilted for a moment, then righted itself. As we walked, I saw the neighborhood through a lens of profound disorientation. The jack-o'-lanterns seemed to watch us pass, their candlelit eyes tracking our progress. A group of children in costumes, a ghost, a superhero, a witch ran past, their laughter ringing in the cold air. But the sound had a brittle, unnatural edge to it, like glass about to shatter. One of them, a little girl in a princess gown, turned her head as she ran, and for a moment, her eyes seemed to glow with a faint orange light, like the embers in a pumpkin belly. Jard's house was small and cluttered, smelling of old books and microwave popcorn. He sat me at his kitchen table and brought a warm, wet cloth to dab at the wound on my head. His proximity was agony and ecstasy. Every time he leaned in, the scent of him soap, clean cotton, and the rich, coppery scent of the blood just beneath his skin flooded my senses, making my mouth water and my stomach clench with a hunger that was far more than physical. I focused on the details of the room to keep from screaming. A bowl of candy corn sat on the counter, its garish orange, yellow, and white colors unnaturally bright. A fake cobweb, dotted with plastic spiders, was draped over a lampshade. Through the window, I could see the enormous, lopsided harvest moon rising, its orange glow staining the night. "The cut's not deep," Jared said, his brow furrowed as he examined my temple. "But this doesn't look right." He showed me the cloth. The stain was that same dark, almost black syrup. "What happened to you?" "I don't know," I whispered, and it was the only true thing I possessed. He gave me a sweater and let me rest on his couch. The days began to bleed into one another, a countdown to Halloween marked by the deepening chill and the escalating decorations in the neighborhood. My strength returned not with food, which turned to ash in my mouth, but with the fading of the moon. As its light waned each night, a strange vitality would seep into my limbs. I found I could see perfectly in the dark. I could hear the scuttling of beetles in the walls, and the whisper of lovers arguing 3 houses down. The world was a symphony of minute, hidden sounds, and the hunger grew. It was a constant, gnawing presence, a hollow ache that resonated with the emptiness in my mind. It was worst around Jard. I would watch the pulse in his throat, a steady, rhythmic beat, and feel a pull so strong it was like a tide dragging me out to sea. I began to avoid him, taking long walks through the October nights, through streets lined with the paraphernalia of the season, the haunted houses with their recorded screams and animatronic ghosts felt like pathetic imitations of the real dread that clung to me. The corn maze on the edge of town, its dried stalks rattling in the wind, seemed to shift its paths when I entered, leading me deeper into its heart, where the silence was absolute and the air was cold and still. I saw things in the periphery of my vision tall, pale figures moving between the rows, their shapes indistinct. I heard children's laughter from within the maze, but when I followed it, I found only discarded candy wrappers and the unsettling, watchful gaze of a scarecrow tied to a post, its burlap head tilted at an inquisitive angle. One night, as I walked past a house with a particularly elaborate display of synthetic cobwebs and plastic skeletons, an old woman was on her porch, rocking in a chair and watching the street. Her eyes, milky with cataracts, fixed on me as I passed. "The veil is thin tonight," she said, her voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "They ray always hungry, this close to the feast. You can feel it, can't you, girl? The pull of the other side." I stopped, frozen by her words. "What do you mean?" She smiled, a gap-toothed grin in her wrinkled face. "Samhain, when the dead walk, and others, the old ones, the ones who are not dead, but not quite alive either. They walk among us on Halloween night, hidden behind masks. Or sometimes they wear no mask at all." She pointed a bony finger at me. "You'd best find your family before the moon is full again. The rivalries are old, and the hunting grounds are being decided. You ray astray, and strays get caught." A cold that had nothing to do with the October air seized me. I hurried back to Jard's house, my heart hammering a frantic, alien rhythm in my chest. The memories began to return not as pictures, but as sensations. The feeling of cool soil, the taste of something rich and vital on my tongue, the sound of chanting in a language I shouldn't know, the sight of a great stone house hidden deep in the woods, its windows dark, its presence a cold weight on the land. On the afternoon of October 30th, the day before Halloween, the doorbell rang. Jard was at work. I answered it and found a man and a woman standing on the porch. They were impeccably dressed, their clothes severe and dark, their faces pale and unnervingly symmetrical. They looked at me not with curiosity, but with recognition. "Colette," the woman said, her voice a smooth, cold stone, "we've been searching for you. It is time to come home." The name meant nothing, and yet everything. It fit the hollow space inside me. "Colette, who are you?" I asked, my hand tightening on the doorframe. "We are your family," the man said. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, and just as cold. "You had an accident, a disagreement with the Vargar family. They are less than pleased. It is not safe for you here with the humans. The Vargar." The name sparked a flicker of fear, an instinctual dread. "I don't know you," I said, but it was a lie. A deep, cellular part of me knew them. It recoiled from their cold perfection, but it knew them. The woman's smile was a thin, bloodless line. "You will. The gathering is tonight. The reaping is tomorrow. You are expected." she held out a hand. On her palm lay a small, carved stone, dark and smooth, with a single symbol etched into it that looked like a stylized, leafless tree. "This will guide you. Follow the pole. Come to the house by the old woods, before the trick-or-treaters ring their first bell, or the Vargar will find you, and they will not be as diplomatic as we have been." They left without another word, moving down the sidewalk with a preternatural grace, their footsteps making no sound on the carpet of leaves. That night, I showed the stone to Jard. I told him everything: the returning shards of memory, the hunger, the visit. He listened, his face growing pale, but his belief was unwavering. He had seen the strange blood, felt the unnatural cold that sometimes emanated from me. He had noticed how I never ate. They said I am not human. I finished, the words tasting like ash. He took my hand, his warmth a painful comfort. "I don't care what you are, Colette. I care who you are. And the person who has been staying with me is someone I want to help." We decided to go. We had to know. As night fell on Halloween, we drove out of town, following the pull of the stone, which grew warmer and vibrated with a low hum as we neared our destination. We left the car on an old logging road and walked into the deep woods, where the last of the autumn leaves formed a brittle canopy overhead, and the moonlight filtered down in shattered silver pieces. The house was exactly as I had sensed it, a massive Gothic structure of weathered stone hidden in a clearing. No lights shone from its windows, but a sense of immense age and power radiated from it. Dozens of people, all pale and severe-looking, were gathered in the clearing. They stood in silent, familial groups. My family was there, the man and woman from the porch, and they nodded to me as I emerged from the trees. They did not acknowledge Jard. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient, withered oak tree, its branches stark against the moonlit sky. And from its thickest branch, something swung slowly in the cold wind. It was a man, or what was left of one. His throat was torn open, and his life had painted the trunk of the tree in a dark, glistening cascade. His eyes were wide with terminal surprise. A Vargar scout, a voice whispered beside me. It was a young man from my family, with eyes like mine. A message: "The hunting grounds are contested. The reaping begins at midnight." The reaping, I understood then. It wasn't a harvest of corn. The humans in their costumes, walking the streets, ringing doorbells, offering themselves up, they were the harvest. We were the reapers. This one night, when the veil was thinnest, was our sacred night, our time to walk among them and take our due. The costumes weren't just for them, they were for us, to hide our true faces as we fed. A great bell unseen began to toll, its sonorous note vibrating deep in my bones. Midnight. The families began to move, flowing like smoke into the woods, toward the distant glow of the town. My family looked at me, their eyes expectant. The hunger inside me was no longer an ache. It was a roar, a command as fundamental as breathing. The memory of the taste, the coppery, life-giving warmth flooded my mouth. Jard looked at me, his face a mask of horror and dawning comprehension. "Colette," he said, his voice small and human in the vast, ancient dark. I looked at him, at the pulse beating so frantically in his throat. I could smell the sweet, vital scent of his fear. It was the most delicious thing I had ever smelled. The world narrowed to that single, throbbing point. The hypnotic rhythm of the bell, the chill of the Halloween air, the rustle of the dead leaves, the approving gaze of my ancient family, it all coalesced into this one inevitable moment. The human and the monster stood facing each other on the threshold of the woods, the line between us now irrevocably drawn. My name is Colette. The bell tolled, and the Hungerwin. It was a wave that crashed over the last crumbling seawall of my resistance. The world dissolved into a single, sharp focus. The pulse in Jard's throat, the scent of his life, the warmth that had been a torment and a promise. I did not choose to move. I was moved. One moment I was standing before him, and the next I was against him, my body moving with a speed that was not my own. My hand, pale and cold, came up to cradle the back of his head, not in a caress, but to steady him. His eyes were wide, the brown of them almost black with shock. He opened his mouth to speak my name again, but only a soft, choked gasp escaped. My lips did not find his throat. That was a human gesture, a parody of intimacy. Instead, I leaned in, and a part of me I had not known existed, a part that felt more truly me than anything else, extended. It was not a thought, but an instinct, an unfolding. A sharp, piercing warmth flooded my mouth, rich and coppery and alive. It was the opposite of the void inside me. It was meaning. It was memory. It was power. Jard's body went rigid, then limp against me. A sigh, a final surrender, whispered past his ear. The roar of hunger subsided, replaced by a profound, humming satisfaction. The emptiness was gone, filled with a vibrant, terrifying light. I saw flashes behind my eyes. A stone altar under a cold moon. The taste of frost and blood. The Vargur, their faces shifting between human and something lupin and savage. The rules of the reaping. The thrill of the hunt. I held him as the life left him, drinking until the vibrant warmth faded to a dull, cooling stillness. When I finally lowered him to the carpet of leaves, the act felt both sacred and obscene. I felt strong. I felt whole. I felt like a monster. A slow, deliberate clapping sound came from the edge of the clearing. The woman from my family, the one who had called me Colette, stepped forward, a genuine smile now gracing her lips. "Welcome home, daughter," she said. Her voice was no longer a cold stone, but a purr of satisfaction. The first feeding after a long slumber is always the most potent. It awakens everything. I looked down at my hands. They were clean. There was no mess, no evidence of the violence, except for the faint, lingering warmth in my veins and the small, still form at my feet. The hunger was sated, but a new kind of ache was born in its place, a hollow of guilt and horror that this new, ancient part of me seemed to observe from a great distance. The human was a complication, the man said, coming to stand beside the woman. You have simplified things. Now, there is no tether to that world. You are ready for the rest of the night. The rest of the night. The reaping. The town was still out there, full of lights and laughter and costumed children. My family began to move again, their forms blurring as they slipped between the trees, their pale faces turning toward the distant glow. I took one last look at Jard. His kind, open face was peaceful in death, a stark contrast to the terror that had been there moments before. He had been my anchor, and I had cut the line. The old woman's words echoed in my newly awakened mind. Strays get caught. I was not a stray anymore. I had been claimed. I turned my back on the body and followed my family into the woods. My movements were fluid and silent, my senses expanded, drinking in the night. I could hear the rustle of every leaf, the heartbeat of a rabbit hiding in its burrow, and far away, the joyous, ignorant screams of children trick-or-treating. The moon, full and heavy overhead, was no longer a distant lantern, but a familiar, approving eye. The hunt was on, and I was both the hunter and the haunted. The woods were a different place now. The trees were no longer obstacles, but sentinels, their gnarled branches pointing the way. The fear I had felt in the corn maze was gone, replaced by a cold, predatory awareness. I moved with my kin, a pack of shadows flowing toward the town's edge. We did not speak. Our intent was a shared current, a silent understanding of the night's purpose. We emerged from the tree line behind a row of houses, whose backyards were strung with fake cobwebs and cardboard tombstones. The air was thick with the smell of candy and candle smoke. Laughter echoed from the street in front, a symphony of potential. The family split apart without a word, each member melting into the night to begin their own hunt. The woman, my mother for all intents and purposes, paused beside me. Her eyes gleamed in the dark. Remember, the mask is everything. They must not see what comes for them until it is too late. Their fear is the spice, but their life is the feast. She gestured to a wicker basket that had been left at the base of a tree. Inside were costumes, not the cheap polyester kind from the store, but old, handcrafted things of lace and velvet and leather. I reached in and pulled out a porcelain mask, its surface painted with a serene, smiling face, the lips a garish red. It felt cold and heavy in my hands. I put it on. The world narrowed through the eye holes, becoming a stage. I was no longer Colette, the lost girl. I was a player in an ancient game. I stepped out of the shadows and onto a sidewalk, blending into the stream of costumed children and harried parents. A group of teenagers jostled past me, their boisterous energy a vibrant beacon. One of them, a boy dressed as a skeleton, bumped into my shoulder. "Watch it, weirdo," he muttered, his breath smelling of cheap beer. I turned my masked face toward him. He met my gaze for a second, his bravado faltering. He saw nothing of the girl from Jard's couch. He saw only the empty, smiling porcelain and the darkness behind it. He quickly looked away and hurried after his friends, a shiver running through him that had nothing to do with the cold. I continued my walk, a predator moving through a herd of blissful prey. I could feel the life in them, each person a small, warm sun. The hunger was a quiet, patient drumbeat now, a guide rather than a master. I was waiting for the right one. I saw her standing alone under a street lamp, trying to fix the wing of her butterfly costume. A little girl, no more than 7 or 8. She had strayed from her parents, lured by a dropped lollipop. Her small heart was a frantic, fluttering bird in my ears. I approached slowly, the mask hiding my expression, my movements gentle. "Are you lost?" I asked, my voice a soft, harmless whisper. She looked up, her eyes wide. She wasn't scared of me. The mask saw to that. "I can't find my mommy," she said, her lip trembling. "I can help you," I cooed, kneeling before her. I reached out a hand, and she took it without hesitation. Her skin was so warm, so full of innocent, untapped life. The hunger stirred, appreciating the purity of the offering. This was the reaping. This was our tradition. I led her away from the light of the lamp, into the deeper shadows between 2 houses. Her trust was absolute. She was still looking at my mask, at the painted, smiling face. She never saw my other hand come up. She never felt the swift, precise motion that silenced the frantic flutter of her heart forever. The warmth that flowed into me was sweet, so much sweeter than Jard's, a burst of sugary, short-lived vitality. I lowered her small, costumed body gently into a pile of crisp leaves. As I stood, I saw another of my kind across the street. A man in a top hat and a long coat, his face hidden by a plague doctor's beak. He held the hand of a small zombie boy, leading him patiently toward a waiting darkness. Our eyes met through our disguises, and he gave a slight, respectful nod. The hunt was proceeding. I walked back onto the main street, the porcelain mask once again a shield. Parents hurried their children along, their own fears focused on traffic and tampered candy, completely unaware of the older, deeper danger walking among them. I was a ghost at the feast, a wolf in the fold. The void was gone, replaced by a terrible, fulfilling purpose. The bell had tolled, the reaping had begun, and I was, finally, home. The night wore on, a tapestry of snatched moments and silenced laughter. The mask became my true face, the smiling porcelain a perfect lie. I moved from street to street, a dutiful daughter of the dark, each encounter a lesson in the old ways. An elderly man taking out his trash, a teenager cutting through a park to get to party, a mother who had let go of her child's hand for just a second too long. Their lives were brief, bright candles, extinguished by a breath. With each one, the memories solidified. I remembered centuries of these nights, the slow, patient shaping of this town as our private preserve, a garden we tended and harvested. As the witching hour approached, the energy of the hunt shifted. The younger children were gone, tucked safely into beds their parents wrongly believed were sanctuaries. Now, the streets belonged to older revelers and my kind. The playful fear of the early evening was curdling into something more potent, a genuine, primal dread that some of the humans felt as a sudden chill, an urge to cross the street, a conviction that they were being watched. I found myself drawn back toward the center of town, where a crowd had gathered for a bonfire. The flames leaped high, a futile human attempt to push back the dark. I stood at the edge of the crowd, the firelight reflecting off my mask, a silent observer. And then I saw him, a Vargur. He was across the fire, not bothering with a costume. He wore simple, dark clothes, but his posture was all wrong, too still, too poised. His eyes scanned the crowd, and they were the color of dried blood. He was hunting, too. Our gazes locked across the roaring flames. A challenge passed between us, wordless and ancient. The informal truce of the early hunt was over. Now it was about territory and pride. A young couple, laughing and sharing a flask, stumbled into the space between us, oblivious. The Vargur-S lip curled, his focus shifting to them. Prey. He began to move, a predator closing in. I moved as well. It was not a conscious decision to protect them. It was a reflex. This was our ground. My family's claim was older. He could not poach here. I reached them just as he did. The girl let out a small, startled yelp as I appeared silently at her side. The Vargur froze, his eyes burning with a feral anger. "This one is mine," I said, my voice flat and cold through the mask. He snarled, a low, guttural sound that was more animal than human. The couple, finally sensing the true danger, stared between us, their faces slack with confusion and dawning terror. The stray remembers her allegiance, the Vargur spat. But you are newly fed. You are soft. He lunged, not for the couple, but for me. His form seemed to blur, his speed breathtaking. But my speed was his equal. The power I had consumed was fresh and potent. I sidestepped his charge, and my hand, looking so slender and human, shot out and caught his throat. The impact was like a gunshot. I squeezed and felt something brittle give way beneath my fingers. He gasped, a wet, choking sound, his eyes wide with shock. He had underestimated the power of a first feeding. I held him there, suspended, as the couple finally broke and ran, their screams lost in the crackle of the fire. I looked into the Vargur-S dying eyes, seeing the reflection of my own blank, smiling mask. "Tell your kin the old grounds are held," I whispered. I released him, and he crumpled to the ground, a puppet with its strings cut. I turned and walked away, leaving his body for the shadows to claim. No one in the crowd had noticed the brief, violent exchange. They saw only the fire. I walked until the sounds of the town faded behind me, following the pull of the stone in my pocket back toward the stone house in the woods. The others were returning, too, their forms emerging from the trees. Some were alone, others in quiet pairs. We gathered in the clearing once more, under the gnarled oak and its grim decoration. The mood was solemn, satiated. my mother figure approached me. She reached up and gently lifted the porcelain mask from my face. The cold night air felt new on my skin. "You dealt with the Vargur," she said. It was not a question. I nodded. Good, the message was sent. She looked at me, her milky eyes seeing everything. "The guilt will fade. It is the last vestige of the human life you thought you had. It is a phantom limb. In time, you will forget it ever existed." She turned to address the family. "The reaping is complete. The balance is restored for another year. We return to the quiet, to the watchful waiting." As one, we turned and filed into the great, dark house. The heavy oak door closed behind us, shutting out the world of men and the lingering echo of Halloween. Inside, it was cold and still, a tomb and a throne room. I walked to a tall, leaded glass window and looked out at the woods. Down in the town, the last of the porch lights were winking out. The feast was over. The hunters were going to bed. And I, Colette, was finally, terribly, awake. The long year of waiting had begun. The silence of the house was a living thing, thick and heavy, with the scent of old wood and dried herbs. There were no instructions given, no assignments. My feet knew the way, carrying me up a winding staircase to a small room under the eaves. It was sparse, containing only a narrow bed and a washstand with a porcelain bowl. A single, simple dress hung on a peg on the wall. This was my room. It had always been my room. I sat on the edge of the bed, the coarse wool of the blanket rough against my skin. My body thrummed with a power that felt both alien and deeply familiar. I could still taste the ghost of the little girl's life on my tongue, a cloying sweetness layered over the robust flavor of jarred and the sharp, wild tang of the Vargur Scout. Each one had left a different echo inside me, a different set of fleeting memories that were not my own. A birthday party, a first kiss, the feel of running on all fours under a winter moon. I looked at my hands, turning them over in the sliver of moonlight coming through the window. They looked the same, but they were not. They were instruments of an ancient covenant, tools for the harvest. The horror I expected to feel was there, but it was distant, muffled, like a radio playing in another room. My mother's words echoed. A phantom limb. A soft knock came at the door before it opened. The young man with eyes like mine entered. He carried a wooden cup filled with dark liquid. He offered it to me without a word. I took it. The smell was bitter, like crushed roots and cold earth. "The draught of Lethe," he said, his voice quiet. "It helps the new memories settle. It quiets the human noise." I brought the cup to my lips and drank. It was as bitter as it smelled, but a warmth spread through my chest, a comforting numbness that softened the sharp edges of the night. The frantic beat of the little girl's heart in my ears grew fainter, becoming just a fact, a detail of the hunt, no different from the color of her costume. "My name is Elias," he said, taking the empty cup from me. "I am your brother. I was there when you were born, and I was there when you were lost. Welcome back, Colette." He left as silently as he had arrived, closing the door behind him. I lay back on the bed, the draft pulling me toward a dreamless sleep. My last conscious thought was not of Jarred S. still form or the butterfly girl S. trusting eyes. It was of the turning of the seasons, of the long, quiet stretch of days until the leaves would fall again. The reaping was over. Now was the time for patience, for watching the town from the shadows, for tending the herd in its ignorance. I closed my eyes, and for the first time, I did not feel like a monster wearing a girl-esque skin. I felt like myself. I felt like home. The days that followed were a study in stillness. The house was a vessel adrift on a sea of silent time, its inhabitants moving through the rooms with the quiet purpose of priests in a temple. There were no clocks, but I felt the sun's arc across the sky, the subtle shift in the wind that spoke of the coming winter. My family, my kin, were mostly silent. We communicated in glances, in the shared understanding of our nature. We did not need to feed again for a long while. The reaping had filled our reservoirs, and now we conserved the energy, letting it sustain us through the dormant months. I spent my hours relearning the old ways. Elias taught me how to tend the garden of poisonous, night-blooming flowers whose petals we used in the draft. My mother, whose name was Lillian, showed me the ledgers, the meticulous records of the town's families, their lineages and strengths. We were farmers, and this was our livestock. A bad year, a weak harvest, could mean a long, hungry sleep for one of us. The balance was everything. Weeks bled into months. The first snow fell, blanketing the woods in a pure, silent white. I stood at my window, watching it cover the evidence of the autumn, and felt nothing but a vague appreciation for its beauty. The phantom limb of my humanity had, as Lillian promised, begun to wither. The memory of Jarred was a faded photograph, the sound of his laughter an echo from a forgotten dream. The guilt was a cold stone at the bottom of a deep, dark well. I could still see it if I looked down, but I no longer felt its weight. It was during the deep freeze of January that Lillian called me to the hearth. The fire was the only real warmth in the house, a concession to the illusion of life we sometimes maintained. She was holding a small, velvet-wrapped bundle. "The town is having a festival," she said, her milky eyes fixed on the flames. A winter carnival to break the monotony. They will all be there, gathered in the square, thinking their little thoughts, living their little lives. She unwrapped the bundle. Inside was a locket, tarnished silver, and intricately carved with patterns I recognized from the stone altar in my memories. "This belonged to you. Before. I took it. The metal was cold against my skin. I clicked it open. Inside was a tiny, preserved sprig of wolfsbane. "It is time for you to walk among them in the daylight," Lillian said. "Not to hunt. Not yet. To observe. To remember what they are when they are not afraid. To feel the sun on your face and know it for the lie that it is." The next afternoon, I walked into the town for the first time since Halloween. The sunlight was weak, filtered through a haze of gray cloud, but it felt strange on my skin, not warm, but exposing. The world was too bright, too loud. The cheerful music from the town square was a vulgar noise. The smell of roasting nuts and hot chocolate was cloying. I moved through the crowd, the locket a hidden weight against my chest. I saw faces I recognized from the ledgers. The baker whose grandfather had been a particularly robust harvest. The woman who ran the post office, her bloodline thin but sweet. They were all there, laughing, their breath misting in the cold air, completely unaware of the predator in their midst. And then I saw her. A woman bundled in a thick coat, holding the hand of a small boy. The boy was wearing a bright blue hat. The woman's face was etched with a grief so profound, it was a physical force in the crowded square. It was Jard's mother. I knew her from the brief, flashing memories I had consumed from him. Her son was gone, a mystery the town had largely forgotten, chalking it up to a tragic accident or a runaway. But her grief was fresh. It was a raw, open wound. Our eyes met across the crowd. For a single, heart-stopping moment, I thought she saw it. I thought she saw the truth behind my eyes, the ghost of her son in my stolen vitality. Her gaze was a lance of pure human pain. It should have shattered me, but it didn't tee the coldness inside me held firm. I felt a flicker of something not guilt, not remorse, but a kind of clinical interest. Here was the consequence, the ripple in the pond. I looked back at her, my face a placid mask, and then I turned and walked away, melting back into the flow of the crowd. Her pain was simply data, a note for the ledgers. As I walked back toward the woods, the weak sun sinking below the trees, I felt a quiet sense of completion. The last thread had been severed. The girl I had been was truly gone, her final echo silenced by a mother's grief. I was Colette, daughter of the dark, keeper of the balance. The snow crunched under my feet, a sound as familiar as my own heartbeat. I was not going back to the house. I was returning to it. I was, and would always be, home. The path through the woods was a familiar scar in the landscape, a wound that never truly healed. The silence of the trees was a welcome relief after the noise of the carnival. Here, the only sounds were the crunch of my footsteps and the distant, lonely cry of a crow. The cold was a comfort now, a familiar cloak that held no threat. Back in the stone house, Elias was waiting for me just inside the door. He said nothing, but his eyes asked the question. I gave a single, slow nod. He understood. The final test had been passed. The last of the human sentiment had been scoured away by the raw, useless pain of a grieving mother. Lillian was in the great room, standing before the cold fireplace. She did not turn as I entered. You saw her, she stated. Yes, and it was like watching an animal in a trap. There was no connection, only observation. This time she turned. A rare, thin smile touched her lips. It was not a pleasant expression. Then you are ready. The waiting is over. The watching begins in earnest. That night, my duties changed. I was no longer relegated to the garden or the ledgers. I was given the twilight patrols, the long, solitary walks along the borders of our territory. I was to watch for signs of the vargur, for any other creatures that might be drawn to the fertile, fearful energy of the town. I was to note any changes in the herd sickness, new arrivals, departures. I was a warden. The winter deepened, and the town below hibernated. Lights went on early in the small houses, and smoke curled from chimneys. From the ridge, I could see it all, a diorama of fragile, fleeting lives. I felt a profound sense of ownership, of stewardship. This was our charge. We were the sharp, necessary price they paid for their ignorance. We were the secret keepers of their mortality. One night, near the end of February, I found Elias on the ridge, staring down at a single, brightly lit house on the outskirts of town. It was the home of the postmaster, a man with a weak heart noted in our ledgers. "He is failing," Elias said, his voice a low murmur in the still air. "The doctor was there today. It will be soon." I watched the house, the comings and goings of the family inside. Do we intervene? No, a natural death is a part of the balance. It is a return of energy to the world, just in a different form. We only take what is needed to sustain our watch. To take more is gluttony. To take less is starvation. I understood. This was the core of the covenant. We were not mere killers. We were part of an ecosystem. The reaping was a controlled burn, preventing a greater, more chaotic conflagration. The postmaster died 2 nights later. I felt it, a small, localized dimming of the town's collective vitality. I stood on the ridge and watched the funeral procession a few days after that, a line of black ants crawling through the snow. I felt nothing but a quiet acknowledgement of the cycle continuing. When the first green shoots pushed through the thawing earth, a new restlessness settled over the house. The long sleep of winter was ending. The energy we had stored from the reaping was beginning to wane, just enough to make us aware of its ebb. We did not hunger, not yet, but we became more attentive. We watched the town with the focused patience of farmers watching their fields, waiting for the first signs of ripeness. I found myself drawn more and more to the edges of the town, to the places where the woods met the backyards. I would stand for hours, perfectly still, listening to the sounds of their lives. A couple arguing, a child practicing the piano, the mundane music of existence. It was no longer a noise I despised. It was the sound of the garden growing. One evening in late April, as I stood in the deepening twilight, a young man came out into his backyard to take down a bird feeder. He was in his early 20s, strong from physical labor. He whistled a tuneless melody as he worked. I watched the easy movement of his muscles, the steady, robust rhythm of his heart. He was healthy. He was prime. He suddenly stopped whistling and looked up, his eyes scanning the tree line. Couldn't he see me? I was a part of the shadows, but he sensed something. A primal instinct, a vestige of the prey animal that still lived inside every human. He stared directly at where I stood for a long moment, a faint frown on his face. Then he shook his head, muttered to himself, and went went back inside. I smiled. It was an expression that held no warmth. The phantom limb was gone. There was only the patient, quiet certainty of the hunter. The long wait was beginning to feel like a long, slow draw of a bowstring. I turned and melted back into the woods. The year was turning. The leaves would fall again. And I would be ready. The path back to the stone house felt different that night. The air was softer, carrying the scent of wet earth and budding trees. It was no longer just a route I walked, but a part of me, an artery connecting me to the heart of my existence. When I stepped inside, the silence was not empty, but full of a shared, patient purpose. Lillian was waiting in the great room. She held out her hand, and in her palm lay a small, smooth river stone, dark gray and veined with white. "For the wall," she said. I took it. This was a ritual I had observed, but never performed. I walked to the far wall of the room, where thousands of similar stones were embedded in the mortar between the larger blocks. Each represented a harvest, a life taken to sustain our own long watch. I found a small, empty space near the floor, a gap waiting to be filled. I pressed my stone into the cool mortar, which yielded and held it fast. It was not an act of pride, nor of shame. It was an act of record-keeping. My first official mark was now part of the house, part of our history. Elias came to stand beside me, looking at the newly placed stone. "It gets easier," he said, his voice low. "Not the taking, but the bearing of it. The weight becomes a part of you, and then you stop feeling it as weight." I knew he was right. The memory of the butterfly girl was now like a page from a book I had read long ago. The details were there if I concentrated, but they held no emotional charge. They were simply information. As the spring deepened into summer, my patrols became more frequent. I learned the patterns of the town in a new way. I knew which teenagers used the woods as a secret meeting place, which men walked their dogs along the same path every evening, which children were brave enough to build forts at the tree line. I cataloged it all. I knew the strong, the weak, the lonely, the loved. The ledger in my mind was vast and detailed. One humid night in July, I was crouched in the canopy of an old oak, watching a house where a family was having a barbecue. The smell of grilled meat was thick in the air. Laughter echoed. Then, a new scent cut through the others, sharp and metallic. It was the smell of the varger. I went perfectly still, my senses stretching out. I saw him then, a darker shadow moving between the trees at the edge of the property. He was young, lean, his form shimmering with a barely contained wildness. He was watching the family, his focus on a teenage boy who was tossing a football with his father. The Varger-S hunger was a palpable force. He was poaching. I dropped from the tree without a sound, landing softly in the damp leaves behind him. He whirled, his eyes glowing amber in the dark. He snarled, a low, guttural sound. "This is not your territory," I said, my voice flat and cold. He bared his teeth. "The old laws are weakening. The packs grow hungry, We take what we find. The old laws are all that keep this town from becoming a slaughterhouse, I replied, taking a step forward. You will leave. Now. He laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Or what? You will call your mother. In answer, I let the power within me rise to the surface. The air around me grew cold. The playful sounds from the barbecue seemed to fade, as if muffled by a sudden frost. My eyes, I knew, were no longer the color of a human girl's. They were the flat, dark gray of a stormy sea. The young Varger's bravado faltered. He took a step back, his snarl dying in his throat. He saw not a girl, but a force of nature. He saw the accumulated weight of centuries of guardianship. Tell your pack the grounds are held, I whispered, repeating the words I had spoken months before. Tell them the daughter of Lillian stands watch. He turned and fled, melting into the woods with a whimper. I stood there for a long time, until the night's sounds returned to normal. The family finished their barbecue and went inside, never knowing how close death had been. I had not taken a life that night, but I had reaffirmed the balance. I had protected the herd. Walking home, I felt a deep, solid calm. The last vestige of the girl I had been was not a memory of guilt or grief. It was a memory of weakness. That weakness was gone. I was the warden, the hunter, the keeper of the covenant. I was Colette, and I was, finally, complete. The long wait continued, but it was no longer a burden. It was my purpose, and I embraced it with a cold, still heart. The confrontation with the Varger was not mentioned upon my return. Elias simply met my eyes and gave a slow, approving nod. The house itself seemed to breathe a sigh of ancient relief, its stones settling more deeply into the earth. We were not a family of celebration, but of acknowledgement. The balance had been tested, and it had held. The summer heat grew thick and heavy, pressing down on the woods like a woolen blanket. The town below thrived in its oblivious way. Gardens were tended, children played in sprinklers, and the air was filled with the scent of cut grass and charcoal. I watched it all from the shadows, my senses tuned to the rhythm of their lives. I could almost taste the vitality rising from them, a sweet, heavy scent on the air, like fruit nearing its peak. Lillian began to spend more time with me in the ledgers. Her bony finger would trace a name, and she would tell me a story not of the individual, but of the bloodline. This one, she would say, tapping the page. The Millers, strong stock, resilient. They grieve hard, but they do not break. A harvest from this line sustains for a long time. It was a farmer's assessment, a judgment of quality and yield. One evening, she closed the ledger and looked at me, her milky eyes seeming to see through to my core. The autumn equinox approaches. The veil will thin. It is a time of power, a time for choosing. I understood. The reaping was not a random culling. It was a selection. The choice of who would sustain us through the long winter was a sacred responsibility, a matter of maintaining the genetic and spiritual health of the herd as much as our own. The boy you watched, she said, her voice a dry rustle. The one who felt your presence in the spring. His name is Leo. His family is new to the town. Their roots are shallow. His strength is untainted. I saw the image clearly in my mind. The young man taking down the bird feeder, the muscles in his arms flexing, his vital, untroubled spirit. He was a good choice, a clean harvest. I am ready, I said, and the words were true. The following weeks were a period of intense focus. I shadowed Leo. I learned his routine. He worked as a groundskeeper at the old cemetery, a job that suited our purposes. He was quiet, solitary, and often worked until dusk. He had no mate, few friends. His disappearance would cause a ripple, but not a tsunami. It was, in the cold calculus of our existence, efficient. The night of the equinox arrived, cool and clear. The moon was a sharp sliver in the sky. I wore a simple, dark dress, one of the many that had been waiting for me in the wardrobe of my room. I did not need a costume. I was not hiding anymore. I found him where I knew he would be, stacking tools in the cemetery shed as the last light faded from the sky. He heard my approach and turned, his face initially showing annoyance, then confusion, then a dawning, primal fear. He recognized me, not as a person, but as the presence from the woods. "You," he whispered, his hand tightening around a rake handle. "The herd is strong this year," I said, my voice calm, almost gentle. "Your vitality will be a gift to the ancient dark. It will help us keep the watch." I did not rush. There was no need. He was frozen, caught in the gravity of my nature. I reached out and touched his cheek. His skin was warm, alive with the frantic beat of his heart. I looked into his eyes and saw the brief, brilliant flash of his life, his childhood by the sea, the smell of salt air, the simple pride in a job well done. Then I showed him the truth of the world. I showed him the stone house, the wall of stones, the endless, turning wheel of the seasons, and the beautiful, terrible necessity of the balance. His fear did not turn to scream, but to a silent, awestruck understanding. The act itself was swift and clean. A release, not a theft. His energy flowed into me, a warm, potent river that filled the reservoirs the summer had slowly depleted. It was not a violent end, but a transference, a returning of a borrowed resource to its rightful guardians. I laid him gently on the soft grass near a gravestone, arranging his limbs so he looked as if he were sleeping. There was no mark upon him. The town would find him and invent a story, a heart attack, an aneurysm. They would never know the truth, and their ignorance was their protection. As I walked back through the woods, the energy of the harvest coursing through me, I felt the rightness of it settle deep in my bones. The cycle was complete. The long wait was over, for now. I picked up a smooth, gray stone from the path, its weight familiar and comforting in my hand. I would add it to the wall when I returned, another mark in the long, silent history of our watch. The leaves were beginning to turn. The air was crisp. I was home. Story 2. The silence was the first thing I noticed. It was not the gentle quiet of a sleeping town, but a profound, swallowing absence of sound that felt heavy, deliberate. It was the silence of a held breath, of a paused film strip, a vacuum into which the frantic thumping of my own heart rushed to fill the void. It was October 28th, and the world outside my window on Hemlock Lane had gone mute. The usual rustle of the great oak's dying leaves was gone. The distant hum of a car on the state road had vanished. Even the wind seemed to have died in its tracks, refusing to stir the orange and black decorations that hung, limp and waiting, from every porch but one. That one house stood directly across the street, 13 Hemlock Lane, a Victorian monstrosity of peeling gingerbread trim and sagging porches. Its windows were sightless black eyes, its empty porch a gaping mouth. No cheerful jack-o'-lanterns grinned from its steps. No fake cobwebs stretched across its shrubs, which had grown into wild, thorny tangles. It was a void in the midst of our neighborhood's frantic, festive preparation for Halloween. A dead spot in the vibrant autumn tapestry. The children, even the bold teenagers, gave it a wide berth when trick-or-treating maps were drawn. They called it the Whisper House. Stories were told, of course, in the way stories are always told about such places. A family had died there a long time ago. Not just died, but vanished. The father, they said, had been a man of strange appetites and had dug a root cellar so deep it tapped into something cold and old. The house had stood empty for decades, a monument to whatever had happened within its walls. Its legend as much a part of Halloween in our town as candy corn and plastic masks. I was new to the neighborhood, a writer seeking quiet, and I found the silence and the house irresistibly compelling. My name is Melanie. I thought myself a rational person and observer. I saw the house not as a thing of fear, but of fascination, a story waiting to be uncovered. That first unnatural silence broke after a few minutes, as if a switch had been flipped. The wind returned with a sigh, rustling the leaves. A dog barked somewhere, but the memory of that deep, distorted quiet lingered with me. A cold stone in my gut. The next day, October 29th, I saw Emmanuel for the first time. He was a gaunt man, perhaps in his late 50s, dressed in a worn tweed coat too heavy for the chill. He stood on the sidewalk across the street, staring at the Whisper House with an intensity that was almost physical. I went out to get my mail, the crunch of dried leaves under my boots unnaturally loud. "It's watching today," he said, without turning to look at me. His voice was a dry rasp, like leaves skittering across pavement. "I am sorry," I said. He finally turned. His eyes were a pale, watery blue, burning with a feverish light. The house. It watches more closely as the night approaches. It's gathering its strength. Can you feel it? The air is getting thicker. I hugged myself, the October cold seeping through my sweater. Ure Emmanuel, Aaron T.U. I.D. heard the neighbors mention him. The local historian, the one obsessed with the legend. He gave a curt nod, his gaze drifting back to the house. They think I am mad. They hang their decorations, carve their pumpkins, play at being frightened. They have no idea what real fear is. They've forgotten the old truths of this night. The veil isn't just thin here, it has torn. And that house is the tear. He spoke in a low, confidential whisper, as if sharing a dreadful secret. It was the tone I wanted to capture in my writing, that hypnotic, intimate dread. I found myself drawn to him, to his obsession. It felt more real, more potent than the cheap thrills of the holiday around us. What happened there? I asked. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. He wasn't satisfied with the harvest from the land. He wanted a different kind of harvest, something that grew in the dark without sun. He dug and he dug, and he found a place where the darkness was alive. It fed him, and in return he fed it. It still hungry. It always hungry, but on Halloween it can reach. That night I dreamed. Or perhaps I didn't tee the boundaries in that house in that week, felt uncertain, porous. I was standing in the yard of 13 Hemlock Lane. The moon was a huge, lopsided orange pumpkin in the sky, bathing the world in a sickly light. The air smelled of wet earth, rotting vegetation, and something else, something sweetly metallic, like spoiled candy. From the side of the house, a staircase led down into the earth, a black maw framed by stone. And from within that darkness, I heard a soft, wet, clicking noise, like a great tongue moving over stone. I woke up shivering, the taste of copper in my mouth, the rustle of corn stalks from a distant field echoing in my ears. October 30th. The town was a frenzy of final preparations. Skeletons danced on lawns, ghosts floated from trees, and every window seemed to hold the flickering, demonic grin of a jack-o'-lantern. The festive atmosphere was a thin veneer. I could feel the ancient fear beneath it now, the primal understanding that this was a night when the rules changed. The laughter of children in their costumes sounded shrill, almost desperate. A group of them, dressed as witches and zombies, ran past my house, their footsteps a frantic drumbeat on the pavement. One of them, a little girl in a black cat costume, stopped and pointed a gloved hand at the Whisper House. The bad man is waiting for the treats, she sing-songed, before running off to catch her friends. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature traced its way down my spine. I found Emmanuel again, standing in the same spot. He looked paler, more strained. In his hand, he held a small, leather-bound journal. It has to end, he whispered to me, his eyes wide, the cycle. It has been too long. He takes one every year, someone who gets too close, someone curious. The townspeople they know. They pretend it's accidents, disappearances. They leave a bowl of candy on their porches and lock their doors, an offering to keep it satisfied, to keep it at their neighbor's house and not their own. But it's never enough. It's growing stronger. Who does it take? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The innocent. The new. The ones who don't know the rules. He looked at me, and in his gaze I saw a terrible pity. Or the ones who think they are above them. He pressed the journal into my hands. His skin was icy. Read this, then you will understand. I am going in tonight, before the night itself. It might be weaker. You can tee, I said, a sudden, inexplicable fear gripping me. I must. It is why I am here. It is my family's curse. My great-grandfather was the first to defeat it. He turned and walked away, his figure swallowed by the long shadows of the afternoon. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, the journal burning a hole on my coffee table. The festive sounds from the street, the doorbells, the laughter, the rustle of costumes felt distant, muffled, as if I were listening from underwater. The world had taken on a dreamlike, blurred quality. I watched the shadows from the dancing jack-o'-lanterns across the street, and for a moment, they didn't look like dancing shadows at all, but like clutching, skeletal hands. As full dark fell on the 30th, I saw a flicker of light in the black eye of the Whisper House. A flashlight beam, jerking and unsteady. Emmanuel. I should have called the authorities, but a morbid, writerly curiosity held me fast. I stood at my window, watching, my breath fogging the cold glass. The light moved from window to window on the ground floor, then disappeared. It did not reappear. The silence returned. That same deep, unnatural silence from 2 days before. It was louder this time, more menacing. It was the silence of a predator that has just fed. I could not sleep. I picked up the journal. The handwriting was spidery, frantic. It spoke of the original owner, Alistair Hemlock, and his excavations. It described the thing in the cellar not as a monster, but as a presence, a consciousness of pure hunger that existed in the spaces between worlds. It preferred the dark, the cold, the quiet. It fed on warmth, on life, on sound. And it could wear the faces of those it consumed, could use their voices, a pale imitation to lure more. Halloween was its high holy day. The one night its influence could extend beyond the property line. Its whispers could be heard in the wind. Its form could briefly solidify from shadow and fear. The last entry in a shaking hand was from Emmanuel. It read, "The silence is its voice. The hunger is its heart. I hear it calling my name with my father's tongue. It is my inheritance. I go to meet it." Dawn on October 31st was a gray, somber affair. Frost etched cryptic patterns on my window panes. The police car arrived at mid-morning, summoned by an anonymous neighbor who'd finally noticed Emmanuel was missing. I watched from my porch, a cup of cold coffee in my hand, as 2 officers emerged. They moved with the weary resignation of men performing a ritual. They knew the legend. They were part of the town's unspoken agreement. They went in, their flashlights piercing the gloom. They were inside for less than 10 minutes. They came out, their faces pale and set. Nothing, one of them said to the small crowd that had gathered, his breath misting in the cold air. Place is empty, just dust, probably left town. You know how he was. But I saw the look they exchanged. I saw the way one of them subtly wiped his hands on his pants, as if they were sticky. hadn't T gone into the cellar? I was sure of it. No one ever went into the cellar. Halloween night descended with a chilling finality. The sun bled away behind the skeletal trees, and the world was transformed. The street, so quiet and normal by day, became a phantasmagoria of light and shadow. Tiny ghosts and giggling goblins flitted from door to door, their bags growing heavy with loot. The air was thick with the smell of burning candles, sugar, and wood smoke. It was a perfect postcard Halloween, and I could not stand it. The journal was in my hand. Emmanuel S. words echoed in my head. The ones who think they are above the rules. I was an observer. I was rational. The house was just a house. The legend was just a story. I needed to see. I needed to know. I waited until the witching hour approached, until the younger children had been taken home, and only the older, braver teenagers roamed the streets, their laughter edged with a reckless hysteria. I crossed the street, my footsteps silent on the carpet of dead leaves. I walked up the overgrown path to the porch of 13 Hemlock Lane. The door was unlocked. It swung inward with a long, low groan that sounded like a sigh of relief. The inside was a tomb. The air was frigid and stale, carrying the faint, sweet smell of decay, like a rotten pumpkin left too long on the porch. Moonlight filtered through the grimy windows, painting silver bars on the dusty floorboards. I could hear the muffled sounds of the festivities outside, but they seemed to come from a world miles away. In here, the silence was absolute, a physical pressure on my eardrums. I found the door to the cellar exactly where Emmanuel S. journal had described it, hidden behind a collapsed bookcase in what was once the kitchen. It was a heavy, reinforced door, and it was slightly ajar. A colder air whispered from the crack, carrying that wet, clicking sound from my dream. This was madness. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but the obsession, the need to know, was stronger. I pushed the door open. The stairs were rough-hewn stone, descending into a blackness so complete it felt solid. I clicked on my phone's flashlight. The beam was a pathetic, tiny thing, barely piercing the gloom. I descended, each step a negotiation with terror. The air grew colder, damper. The smell intensified wet soil, rot, and that cloying, metallic sweetness. The cellar was vast, far larger than the house's footprint should have allowed. The walls were not dirt, but a strange, smooth, black stone that seemed to absorb the light. And in the center of the space, the floor was not stone, but a patch of pure, unadulterated darkness. It was a void, a pool of absolute black that did not reflect my light. It was the source of the cold, the smell, the silence. The clicking sound was louder here. It was coming from the darkness, and then a shape began to form within it. It was not a solid thing, but a coalescence of shadow and memory. It shifted, writhed, and for a moment, it had the gaunt, desperate shape of Emmanuel. Its eyes were 2 points of bottomless black. It opened a mouth that was a ragged tear in reality, and it spoke with his voice, a perfect, hungry imitation. You came, it rasped. I knew you would. The curious ones always do. You have read the menu. Now you are the feast. It wasn't a monster I could fight. It was a condition. It was the silence given form. It was the hunger at the end of all things. It flowed towards me, not with steps,